welcome back. It is great to have you here, watching if you are on YouTube or on the live stream this evening, or if you are listening on the podcast. However you're hearing this, God bless you. May you be having a wonderful day, whatever time of day it is, wherever you might be in this wonderful world of ours. I hope you are safe. I hope you are enjoying everything around you, and I hope you're going to enjoy what we're going to look into today. So, last time we looked into a little bit of how Jesus is now responding to the world around him. Previously, we've seen his cosmic origin, if I can put it like that. We've seen his incarnation, how he has come to the earth, and how he has now begun to grapple with the things around him. Both people responding to Jesus turning up, and he is responding to others around him. Some people believe him, some people don't. Some antagony surrounding him, but he's got growing followers, disciples around him. Now, what we saw last time, he was in Jerusalem. He was in the capital. But now, we have a little bit of a change of scene. Let's delve right in. We are going to be starting here with the Gospel of John, chapter 4, starting from verse 1. Let's dive in. So, starting at the first sentence, I will begin reading. If you are watching or listening along, please enjoy my reading voice. So, right. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, that is John the Baptist. Although, in fact, it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Okay, so we have here the situation. Now, remember the Pharisees, they are the religious and political leaders of Israel in this time. He's already had a conversation with one of them, that was Nicodemus. However, Nicodemus seems to perhaps be one of few who truly believes that Jesus is actually who he says he is. He is the Son of the God that they worship. He is the Messiah, this chosen bloke who's turned up. They are debating about the miracles that he's doing and if they're real or not. Nicodemus believes, and Jesus has already had a great conversation with him, but a lot of them are very skeptical, and we kind of get this impression, we kind of already know this, that they are wary of little people gaining their own groups of followers. They might see that as a threat. And we understand this already from John the Baptist, who for many years has already been kind of doing what Jesus is doing at this time. Baptizing people and gaining followers and teaching. I mean, perhaps that's a key thing. He is teaching something, and perhaps that feels contrary to what these leaders feel like should be said, or what they want to say. They have a very specific way of social reform in mind, and they want to see that achieved. And some nutter in the wilderness comes out with more radical and maybe different ideas. They might see that as a bit of a threat to their authority. But John has already been a threat for some time. Now Jesus is coming along, and he's actually causing even more of a stir, as we see gaining and baptizing more disciples than even John. So in shorter time, in very quick succession, Jesus is coming along and posing to be an even more interesting, or perhaps threatening sort of character to their regime, I suppose you could say. However, John the Apostle, the narrator, does specify that we have a different reality in play. Jesus is allowing his disciples to do it. So, what does this new information tell us about Jesus? Well, he's not a dictator. He's not trying to be an authority. He's not trying to take control, he's actually saying, do you know what? Like, this is something everyone can do. It is a growing system. Could you imagine if I tried to do it all by myself? I'd have to do one here, one there, one there, and I can only do one at a time. But if I allow my followers to spread the news, to actually bring more people in, it's an exponential growth. And perhaps that explains why Jesus' discipleship, his group of followers, is growing so rapidly, because he's allowing his followers to actually gather more people to him, and to his words, and to his teaching. But Jesus understands, and we get this in verse 3, that the watchful eye of these Pharisees is actually a threat to his own ministry, his own preaching. And so he decides to change location. And previously we saw he'd gone out into the Judean countryside, but now he's going back to his home turf. He's going back to Galilee, which is a different nation, still a Jewish group. I'm going to have a look at a map a little bit later, but we are going to see what happens, not even as he reaches his final destination, but what happens on the road, what happens in the middle, almost an accidental thing. And it's an incredible, and it's actually a very famous story. So, now, verse 4. He had to go through Samaria. Oh dear. Oh, Samaria. Ah! Okay. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, or Sychor, or it might be pronounced Sychar. Not quite sure on that one. If you know it, please correct me. Okay. But it's near the plot of ground Jacob had given his son Joseph. Ooh. Now that's quite important in the ancient Jewish context. Jacob understood to be one of the forefathers, one of the patriarchs, as they say, of the Jewish race. He, as many of you might know, the musical Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, that is the Joseph referenced here. Jacob had 12 sons, and each of those sons had their own offspring, and they are their offspring of the 12 sons is then understood to be the 12 tribes of Israel. So this ground, albeit in a very different area, is still possesses a rich Jewish history. Now, I'll explain more detail as to why the Sumerians are different in a moment. But for now, we need to know that actually this is a very important place to both Samaritans, and to the Jewish people. That this well has a historical significance. So we have the scene set. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" Now his disciples had gone into the town to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" And then in brackets we have explained, "For Jews did not associate with Samaritans." Now, Jesus is sitting by Jacob's well, a place very important in Jewish and Samaritan history, because they're both from the same origin. Now, if you understand anything about the Old Testament, if you don't worry, I'm about to explain. But what you have is the Jewish people all began with one man. His name is Abraham. You may have heard of him. Now, he had 2 sons. The first son is considered to be a bit illegitimate because he had that son from his servant, Hagar, was his wife's servant, and that child was Ishmael. But because of that child's illegitimacy, it didn't come from his actual wife. That child is sent out into the wilderness, and isn't really considered to be part of the true lineage. There's some relevancies to that, lots of fascinating stuff to look into. But in his old age, Abraham has his legitimate son with his actual wife. Her name is Sarah, Now, he's 100 years old and she's 99, so it's considered to be an incredibly miraculous sort of birth. And that son is called Isaac. Now, Isaac, you may have heard of the story of the sacrifice of Isaac, how God apparently tells Abraham to go up on a mountain and sacrifice his only son. And then when he gets there, and Abraham has such faith in God that actually he is going to provide, as Abraham is bringing the knife down upon his son, his son could have broken free. He was a young and fit man at this stage, but he was so obedient to even his father's faith that he didn't. But just as the knife is coming down, God sends an angel to stop that knife and to provide a sacrifice of a ram instead. It's a famous story known to Jews and Christians, a foretelling of the sacrifice that ultimately Jesus is going to give completely. But that is a very quintessential part of the we call it the Jewish patriarchy. We started with Abraham, then we have his son Isaac, and when he is old enough, then we have Jacob. And often places all through the scripture will refer to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then it's from Jacob that we then have his 12 sons, and each of their offspring becomes the 12 tribes of Israel. The youngest of those 12 tribes, the two youngest are Joseph, who had his Technicolor Dreamcoat, and Benjamin, and they are sort of seen to be the two sort of the favourites. They got a lot of nice stuff in the future, and the others kind of they have their moments, and sometimes they have their rebellious moments as well. But basically, some of those tribes later on down the line, they disobey God, and when they get into the Promised Land, when they populate Israel, they begin to, some of them, not all of them, intermarry with other folks of other races and other religions, and so their racial identity becomes watered down, and their religion becomes warped. They begin to bow down to idols and different deities. Basically, they disobey God, and so the landscape in this very useful map looks very much like that, and you can see Judea in the bottom, the kind of the orange area. The countryside there, that's where Jesus is travelling from at this stage. And he's going up to the pink bit, Galilee, his homeland. But in the middle, he has to travel through Samaria. And this is the area of land where the folk who, the Samaritans, those tribes who had rebelled against God, who had been disobedient, who had intermarried with barbarians, I think they probably believe them to be. Their religion has become warped. They don't have the true laws of God properly established anymore. They've forgotten a lot of details that they should have remembered. And because of these, the Jews feel like they have a justified reason to hate Samaria, to hate the Samaritan people. See these people as sort of like an offshoot, that there's a point where the lineage is coming down, and then there's these people who have come off to one side. The Jews still believe themselves to be in line with that heritage. The Samaritans in Samaria are somewhere over here. They are an offshoot. They don't even like to refer to these people as cousins or brethren. They hate them. They will do anything. Usually, Jews will, if they have to travel between Galilee and Judea, they will take a different road. They will go, perhaps as you can see, taking that road through Decapolis and through, I can never get this right, Perea, the kind of salmony coloured bit there. Either way, usually when Jews have to travel between Galilee and Judea, they will completely avoid Samaria. They hate the Samaritans that much. And yet Jesus doesn't seem to have a problem with going straight through their homeland. He doesn't show partiality. It is another famous verse in the Bible that God has no favourites. And so he has no problem, and maybe his disciples have a problem, but he is the leader of their gang. Nah, he's going straight through. And you can see cycle in the kind of the lower right area of Samaria on the road. And that is where they are. They are at this well. So let's just refresh. Jesus is at this well. A Samaritan woman has come to the well, and he has just asked her for a drink. And what's her response? Verse 9, "You're a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" She is still so hung up on this racial and social tension between these two people groups. Jesus doesn't have a problem with talking to her about what they have in common. Now, he's been travelling a long way. He doesn't have a bucket, and she does. And he's thirsty. And it's as simple as that. But she is probably wondering, why is this guy talking to me? Isn't he aware of the tension between our peoples? So let's see what happens. So, as this Samaritan lady comes to sit by the side of the well, and she's wary of Jesus. He's a Jew. She's a Samaritan. There's a big difference there. He answers her. So, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water?" Okay, so Jesus is kind of responding in kind of like a weird, sounds like a weird spiritual way, like, if you only knew who you were talking to, then you would have asked him. He's talking about himself in the third person, which is, if it was anyone else, it would come across as very strange. In fact, in her position, I'm sure she thinks he's rather strange. And we can kind of tell this because she doesn't quite understand what he's talking about. Because he refers to himself sort of in the third person as indirectly as the gift of God. You see that in that line at the top? If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink. In other words, if you knew who you were speaking to right now, my lady, you would be asking him for stuff instead of the other way around. But he's talking about living water. And now there's a spiritual reality to this, but there's also the fact that if we look back into the ancient language, the words running water and living water are sort of interchangeable. So that could be a physical thing. We talk about the source of the water, and she's taking that and saying, or thinking that he means getting the water at the bottom of the well, where the water is running, the source, basically. But he means a very different source. Now, if we think about what society is like back then, and a lot of artwork, and if you've visited that part of the world, it's very arid. It's kind of a desert. It's fertile land. It's not quite a proper desert yet, but it is very dry. It's very hot. Water is utterly essential, as it is in all parts of the world, but it's not necessarily always abundant. It's not raining all the time. It's not a forest. It's not like here in England where we have so much rain we complain about it. Wells are incredibly important parts there. I've heard an interesting sort of adage from folk who are farmers in places like Australia. If you have lots of flat desert land out there, great, lots of space for putting cattle. Now, if you had cows in this country, you'd need to build fences. You'd need to put in place a lot of infrastructure to protect and to make sure that cattle doesn't wander. But in a desert environment, you don't need to do that. The land is so massive, there's nowhere for them to really go elsewhere. And even the cows know that you go so far, you'll go away from water. So all the farmers do is they'll build a well. And it guarantees that the cows are going to stay exactly where that well is going to be, right where you want them. In an arid climate like the Middle East, it's kind of the same thing. Obviously, I'm not saying that people out there are like cattle wandering in the wilderness, but what I'm saying is that wells are a center of life. You need it to survive, to wash, to cook, to drink, everything. You need water. You can't take seawater. You can't live off of that. So you either get it from a river, or if you don't have a natural river nearby, you need to build a well. And so in the ancient world, wells are essential. They are a source of life. And yet Jesus is kind of using that as a metaphor. That she still thinks he's talking about a literal source of water. He is talking about a spiritual source of life. And he converses with her, and we'll see how he convinces her of what's going on. So, she is still concerned about real physical water, nothing spiritual at this point. So, let's move on. Verse 12. So, she realizes he doesn't have a bucket, he doesn't have a pail, he doesn't have a rope. How is he going to get this water that he's talking about? So she kind of feels like she's kind of sarcastically mocking him. She says, "Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" So Jesus answered, everyone who drinks from this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty, and I have to keep coming here to draw water." Okay, so she starts off not understanding, being a little bit mocking. But Jesus elaborates on what he's saying. He's saying, what I'm offering you is something else, a different kind of water, not just a physical water that you will need to come back and replenish inevitably the next day. You will thirst again if you depend on physical things. That's basically what he's saying. We are never truly satisfied by the physical things, even the essential things like water. They never satisfy. We have to keep coming back. And whether that's essential things, essential sustenance, or whether that's optional pleasures, the bonus things in life, they never fully satisfy us. We always want more. But Jesus is now offering something that will eternally satisfy, because it of itself is the source of eternal life, and he is offering it. And he's kind of saying a bit indirectly here that he is the only person that can offer this. I am offering it. He doesn't say you can get it from anywhere else. He says I'm offering something that will itself become a spring of water welling up inside a person that is eternal life. So it's not just giving it to someone, but actually it will become its own spring inside of someone. Its own source of a stream or a river. Which means that actually anyone who accepts this new type of water that Jesus is offering, they will in of themselves become a source. So Jesus isn't actually saying that he is the only place to get it from, because that would be a bit annoying, because Jesus isn't walking around anymore. So he's imparting it to others, his followers, his disciples, those who truly trust and believe in him, that they may also spread life. They may give true and pure utter satisfaction. But he is still the origin. He is still the source. We can't say that that we as his followers, if that's what we are ever the one and only source, because we've got it from somewhere else. It's come from him. It spreads in the same way that he was encouraging his disciples to do what he started just a few verses ago. He's now saying, actually, this living water, this is a spiritual satisfaction that will give not just the sustenance for the continuation of life, but is the beginning of eternal life. It is essential for the eternity beyond this body, beyond this world. When this body dies, the eternal life continues. And this woman still doesn't understand. Oh, how frustrating. Verse 15. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water. She still thinks he's talking about a physical type of water, like a magic water. Like imagine a pot that however much water you pour out of it, it's always full. Now that would be really useful in the household. Of course, in constructed houses with plumbing, we just have a tap. You have a faucet or a sink, or we just have kind of unlimited water anyway. But you've got to pay for it. It's a different kind of struggle, but it's the same sort of thing. She is considering that she can have a type of water that she doesn't ever have to strive for again. Perhaps her laziness is driving her. And sometimes we're a bit like that, aren't we? We want all the benefits on the terms that we want it, without any of the struggle. We want all the benefits of friends and community. Or maybe we like the idea of, yes, someone's doing miracles. Yeah, I'll get in on some of that. That sounds amazing. Maybe we like the idea of sharing things, of sharing company, sharing food, receiving things from the community. But we don't want any of the responsibility of having to change our ways. She perhaps still wants the water to come to her. Jesus goes into more detail. He challenges this. Let's see how. He told her, Go call your husband and come back. And she says, I have no husband. She replied. Jesus said to her, You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. He supernaturally reveals a personal secret she's been hiding. And you can imagine the shame that when she says, I have no husband, you can imagine she hangs her head and just looks down and says, I have no husband. Because now a sort of conviction is in place in her. She feels a lot of shame. And Jesus knows the truth about her. God reveals to his mind the secret that she's been hiding. And in any culture, nearly any culture in the ancient world, to move around from just different husbands is a pretty shameful thing for a woman back then to do. And especially to dwell with a man and presumably to sleep with him and you're not actually married to him. It's the worst kind of adultery in many regards in that culture back then. And Jesus is just bluntly exposing this thing. So, that sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? But let's see why he does that. She responds to him, Sir, the woman said, I can see you are a prophet. And she says, Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus says, Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. So, let's expand this. Right at the beginning, Why does he do it? So that she can begin to identify more who he is. Now, she hasn't yet got that he's the promised one. She says, you are a prophet. Now, she would have understood, perhaps read it herself, or maybe just heard the stories of the Jewish prophets who came before, and all the miraculous things that they would have done. And she sees that he is doing a bit of that himself. So that's the identity that she prescribes to him. But, verse 20, she's still thinking about the differences between his people, the Jewish people, and her people of Samaria. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. She's still thinking about the religious difference between them. That's still a barrier for her. She's not ready to accept everything about him yet. And he says, woman! Now, again, if you were watching the episode where we looked at the wedding at Cana and Jesus' mother approaches him and tells him, look, Jesus says there's not enough wine. We've run out of wine. And he says, woman. It's not a chauvinistic comment here. It is the same Greek word that he would have used back then to speak to his mother, that Jesus is now using here to speak to this lady that he doesn't know. Now, in the context of the time, it would have been acceptable, actually, for him to speak down to her. Firstly, because he was a man, and in that culture, men are at a higher position in society. And secondly, that he's a Jew and she's a Samaritan, and the Samaritans are seen to be lower. But the fact is, he's using the same language that he did to address his mother, that he's using to address this lady. Now, it's not like, oh, my queen or my princess. It's nothing particularly fancy, actually. It is just, it's lady. As simple as that. It's kind of like, oh, my lady. Even my lady, in a sort of medieval sense, feels very, very kind of fancy, as if it's a knight approaching a damsel. But the fact is, he's not distinguishing his mother, the one he should respect, the one whose womb miraculously bore him. He has the same amount of compassion for his mother that he does for this lady. Isn't that powerful? All the social divisions that should be in place, and he pushes that aside because he loves her so much. There's so much we can learn from just that little thing. So, he approaches her in love and says, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father. The Father. No difference there. Not your God and our God, but the Father. The Father of the world, the Father of all our people. Neither here nor there. And he identifies that actually, and this could come across as a bit arrogant, but actually perhaps she should know this, that her ancestors rebelled, and that he's saying, you Samaritans worship what you do not know, but actually we Jews are still on the track for now. And that is why he's saying salvation is from the Jews. Salvation, to be saved, to be brought back in unity with God. All the things, all the sin, all the corruption in the world that would cause a divide between us and God. Actually, salvation is coming. And it's going to start from the Jewish people, because it's starting with Jesus. And he's making her aware that actually, look, my darling lady, I love you. Stop seeing these religious and cultural and racial tensions as a division. A time is coming when that isn't going to be a problem. The Father will be worshipped everywhere, not in special places, not on mountains or in temples, but everywhere. He's proclaiming what we call the church, Christians, the unified people who don't have a geographical place but are all over the place. We'll move on to the last bit here, and he elaborates even more. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the spirit and in truth. And so the woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. So, this is where it all comes together. He is proclaiming the time is coming, and actually, it's already here, it's already started, when worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Now, what do these two things mean? Does it perhaps link to when we saw at the beginning of the Gospel of John, where it's explained that Jesus comes with truth? That was one of the things he had. Yes, I think that's definitely true. But here, we instead of grace and truth, we have spirit and truth. Definitely related, a little bit different. Now, in truth, yes, definitely still the same thing. The truth, the reality, putting aside all lies, all things that get in the way of us knowing what really is the case. Jesus is bringing clarity. He's bringing the truth. That's what that truth is. But in the spirit, now sometimes you'll see the spirit with a capital S, sometimes it isn't. If it's got a capital S, usually what we mean there is the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit. That actually, what Jesus is proclaiming here is that the Spirit of God is going to be in and amongst his people to possibly, you could say, to help worship. Sorry, to help us worship, or to be involved in worshipping God. When we say worshipping, we mean it doesn't always have to be musically, but we just mean to focus on God, to proclaim him above all things. Commonly that is done through psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, as the Bible proclaims. So if you looked at a church, yeah, you might see hymn books, or you might see words on a screen, or you might not see words at all. You'll probably see musicians, or maybe you'll just have a recording, or maybe you'll just have a choir. It all look different in all kinds of denominations, in all kinds of structures. But worship is actually very simple. It's actually just coming to focus on God, and to put all distractions aside, and to just focus on God. And you can have prayer as part of that, yeah, definitely. But it is to focus on God. It's as simple as that. And they back then were very sort of ritualistic and religious about it. But the second sort of reason, and especially more the case when you see spirit with a lowercase s, Jesus is saying spirit, which back then means more like heart. So put aside all that religious, ritualistic way of doing it. There's no heart in that. That's just a rhythm. That's just a thing you do. No, there's going to be heart in it. It's going to be genuine. It's going to be real. So it's going to be both in the spirit. It's going to be genuine, and it's going to be truth. It's going to be without inaccuracy. It's going to be the way that God intended it to be. And so he identifies that God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. That's what is coming. Now, the woman says, I know the Messiah, and he's coming, and when he comes, he's going to explain everything. She still hasn't quite understood who he is, but Jesus tops it all off. And he says, I am the one speaking to you, I'm the Messiah. I am he. Now, if you were there listening to this conversation, or if you could read the ancient language, you would understand he's hiding something in here. He's not just saying he is this Messiah, he's the chosen one who's going to bring everything around, but he actually says, I am. Now, some of you know where I'm going with this. This goes back all the way to Moses. Now, again, if you want a really quick wrap up, watch The Prince of Egypt. Brilliant film, lovely animation. And there's a point in that, in Exodus chapter 3, if you want to read the actual biblical text all the way back in the very early Old Testament, is when Moses is commissioned by God at the burning bush to go and to challenge Pharaoh, to challenge the leader of Egypt to bring God's people out of slavery. And Moses, just before he goes, he asks, "Who shall I say has sent me? What is the name I should give?" And God says, "I am who I am." Basically saying he has the ultimate identity. He doesn't even need a human name. I am. I exist. I am, you could say I am powerful. I am God. I am this, that, and the other. He is all these things. And how does he sum it up? He says, I am. And Jesus is quoting right from that point there. So he's not just saying I'm a chosen one. I'm the one and only. But he's saying I am God. He is quoting from the point early enough in the Jewish text that actually it would be in common with both the Jews and the Samaritans. They both would agree on the story of Moses. They don't have a problem with that. And Jesus is quoting from the point where God reveals his ultimate identity. And Jesus says that about himself. People say sometimes that there's no point where Jesus proclaims himself to be God. This is one of the many where actually he does. This is where we're going to end. This story unfolds. We're going to see how actually the disciples are going to turn up and start to have issues here. We're going to see how this Samaritan lady is going to go and talk about the conversation she's just had with the people. And the story is going to unfold. But I want to end with this. Let's think about this conversation. We had, number one, no partiality. Jesus didn't have a problem with going somewhere where he knew that actually there was going to be problems. In fact, he could have been attacked. At that period, the racial tension was that critical. Was that dangerous. But he didn't have a problem with going to the people to show them love. Number two, he found a place where he would have something in common. He was thirsty. She was thirsty. And obviously that place had historical relevance. It was Jacob's well. But actually, he didn't really have a problem with choosing somewhere that he was going to have something in common with. The historical aspect, there's lots of stuff you can look into with regard to the historical relevance, but the main part of that is that he chose a place where he knew he would have something in common with someone. He put himself in a situation where he had to start a conversation, basically. He didn't have a bucket himself, he had to ask someone else. And thirdly, he in love tells the truth. He explains everything, and he gives an offer. Now, those are three things I think a lot of people can learn from. If you are if you're a Christian believer yourself, and you really struggle with the commandments that the Bible gives you of spreading this news yourself, well, there's a good method there. Don't see social norms, the things that we've let be tradition. Don't let that be a boundary. Find something in common with someone, and don't be afraid to speak the truth. We saw actually Jesus was pretty blunt about people's shortcomings, about her adultery, and pointing that out. But he didn't condemn her. He actually at no point did he take a high ground. He wasn't doing an Obi-Wan Kenobi, basically. He was coming on the same level with her. In fact, he was thirsty, and he was dependent on her for water. He put himself in a situation where actually he was vulnerable, so that she could be vulnerable, so that the truth could come out. So, that is where I want to end. And that ties in very nicely with my normal adage. Keep the questions coming. Again, if you are watching this on the stream this evening, then you can jump into the comment box. I can't remember which side of the page it is. If you are watching this on YouTube later, put something in the comments below. If you know me in person, please send me messages. No matter how complex or grueling they are, if you have questions about this, there is so much to dive into here. I know today we went on a little bit longer than I normally would do, but I hope you found that fascinating. I hope you found that little interaction between Jesus and the Samaritan woman really simple yet wonderful. I certainly did. I hope wherever you are keeping safe, you are enjoying yourself, and that you are looking forward to next time. Until then, have a great week. And from me, God bless and cheerio.